Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Skid Data Protection. With Skid Data Protection, you will be learning all the insights you have to know for applying data protection law to your business. So let's start with a very general topic. What is GDPR? And if people are talking about GDPR, what do they actually mean? And does it apply to me? GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation. It's a regulation that was released by the European Commission in 2016 and became active in 2018. Now you will see that this is maybe not so interesting for you. For you, it's interesting, what does it actually mean for you and does it apply to you as a business owner? And if I say business owner, I also mean startups, also small startups who maybe will be asking, does general data protection regulation actually apply to me? So in general, probably it does apply, but let's look at what the law says. So when looking at general data protection regulation and data protection law, you always have to have a code. So I have this code, which is actually quite nice because it has the text, the original text in English and also the original text in German. So you can always see what the text in English, so this is the original text, what it actually says and what maybe people thought when they established the General Data Protection Regulation. So let's look at what the General Data Protection Regulation actually stands for. It stands for the regulation, this is what the law says, on the protection of natural persons with regard to the processing of personal data and on the free movement of such data and repealing Directive 95/45 EC. So what you have to know, I know this is maybe not so interesting for you, but before there was this regulation, there was a directive, which was also a data protection directive and was active entirely for the whole European Union. However, with a directive, I know this is a bit technical, but a directive has always have to be established into law by the national states, so the member states of the European law. So it doesn't become active for every data subject within the European Union, but it requires a member state to then put it into their national law. Whereas this data protection regulations, they do not have to be established by a national parliament into national law. They actually become active the moment they are released, or in this case, it wasn't the release date, but when they became active, that was in 2018. So they became active for the entire European Union and therefore for every one of us and also every business owner. So what does it mean in general? It lays down the law that applies to when a controller or maybe someone else processes data, personal data. So we will have one video on what is actually personal data. We will also have a video on processing of personal data, because when we talk about data protection law, we always look at, is personal data actually processed? And this regulation applies to this processing activities of data by natural persons with regard to their personal data. So maybe also one very important part you have to know is that when we talk about personal data, we always talk about natural persons. So someone like you and someone like me. We do not talk about an entity or a company, because this is not the scope the General Data Protection Regulation foresaw. It only foresees the regulation with regard to processing personal data of natural persons. So please always keep in mind natural persons, not companies, not entities. I know there are jurisdictions where personal data also means personal data by a company, but this is not the scope of the General Data Protection Regulation. So keep this in mind. So let's look at what's the scope of the General Data Protection Regulation and does it apply to me? For most of you, probably this is the reason you actually watched this video. So when looking at does it apply to me, you have to always look at two things. The first one is the material scope and the second one is the territorial scope. So when we talk about material scope, we look at the activity as such. So we look at processing of personal data. So in general, we say it concerns everything that would regulate processing of personal data, except if it's outside the scope of the union law, and if it's done by a natural person purely for personal or household activity. So be aware, a lot of people, I know they go crazy, and they went crazy when the GDPR was released and became active, because suddenly even friends thought they weren't allowed to process personal data any longer. So keep in mind, natural persons that process personal data, but purely for personal or household activity, that's not something that falls within the GDPR. That's something that would fall beneath other laws, and this could be regulated by those other laws. So if maybe a different right of you is being breached by such an activity, then you have other kind of claims, but not claims within the GDPR. So keep this in mind, but be also aware that sometimes the scope between, or also the difference between processing personal data for purely personal and household activities and then becoming a controller. So we will be also having a video on what is actually a controller. It sometimes there's like a natural flow between those two activities, so you have to be aware that you do not fall within a controller. There has been some law, some case law where a natural person was actually also considered a controller and therefore fell within the GDPR, so be aware. And then what also doesn't apply is when a competent authority processes personal data for purposes of prevention and investigation. So probably this is not something that applies to you, but just being said. Let's look at second, the territorial scope. Does it apply to foreign companies as well? So maybe you will be a business that is established in a non-EU EEA country and therefore thinks that the GDPR is not applicable to him or her. I'm sorry to say, but in many cases it will be applicable to you. So just look at the three cases and then let's discuss whether you fall within those three cases. So the first one is the controller or your business is established in the EU and processes personal data. So now we just said you're a controller that sits not in the EU and the EEA, so this would probably not apply to you. Then second, the controller, so you are a non-EU EEA business. So yes, this is true, but you process data from data subjects in the EU EEA. So probably you will. So have you been collecting data from data subjects within the EU? This could be, for instance, if you have a website that is a .com website, so it's available all over the world, so also in Europe, and personal data is being collected by data subject within, for instance, France, because a French citizen has typed in your website and then has been also accepting the cookies. Cookies is also a topic we will be discussing in a separate video. And now you have collected that data. So let's look, because there are two cases you have to make before we say it is actually applicable to you. You have to ask yourself, this is, I would say, a 3-part test. So the first test you just passed because you just said that you process personal data by EU citizens. And now we look, do you offer goods or services to data subjects in the EU? So probably when you have a website that targets also customers worldwide, then yes, you target and you offer services and goods to EU citizens. And then second, are you monitoring? So it's it's not additive. So you probably have rather a 2-part test. So the second question is if you monitor behaviors as far as behavior takes place in the EU. So this would be profiling, everything about profiling. But let's not look at the profiling case. Let's just concentrate on whether you offer goods or services. So in most cases, it will be actually the case if you have a website that offers services and goods worldwide. And then the third part is whether it applies to you. If you are a controller established in a non-EU country, but member state laws apply here. An example that has been given in the GDPR is, for example, member state diplomatic mission or consular post, which will probably not be applicable to you. So what is the lesson we learned today? Either you process personal data, no, not either. You process personal data as a controller within the EU or outside the EU, but then by data subjects that sit within the EU. So I hope you liked this video, and there will be more videos following on what is a controller, what is a processing activity, and maybe also what are data subjects, and everything about data protection. So please hit the like button and press subscribe. Bye.